welcome to Forté's Training and Testing Centre in Coventry. Today what we're going to have a look at is connecting the power clean machine to a diesel fuel system. So we'll look at some types of fuel systems and where we actually connect the machine in. Now it's important when we're connecting the machine to do a fuel system clean or a diesel turbo clean that we find the common feed and return for the fuel system. What we will actually do is disable the vehicle from the fuel system and connect the machine in its place and run the vehicle directly off the machine. So let's take a look at this vehicle and have a look at some of the connections. Okay, so when we look for the fuel connections, here we can see our feed coming into the filter from the fuel tank and our feed coming out of the filter to the fuel pump. So we can remove this connection and connect our feed here from the machine. With the return, we can see our return from the rail, and we also have a return joining that pipework from the injectors, and that joins the pipe coming from the pump. So at this connection here, where the pipes combine, it's at this connection after, which is our common return. This is where we need to connect the machine in, and this will ensure that we do not return any of the product back to the fuel tank. So once we've removed the fuel connections, we need to use the connection kit now and identify the right fittings to connect to the fuel system. It may be worth just using a vernier gauge to actually measure the connection, and then we can then select the right fitting from the fitting kit. So with this particular vehicle, this has a 10mm fitting to go to the fuel filter and a 7.9mm fitting for the return. So we're going to use a 10mm male connection to go into our feed. So this is going to feed our fuel pump, and we will use a 7.9mm connector on our pipe for the connection to the machine for our return. What we must do then is actually loop the feed and return pipe that we've removed. So from our kit, we can use a 7.9 male connector to go into our return fitting. And for our feed, what we can actually do is just put the pipe directly on where we've taken the connection from. So we can put this pipe onto the filter. And just secure with our Jubilee clip. And then use the 7.9mm connector to go into our return. Once we're happy with the connections, we can then connect the feed and the return from the machine. So red is our feed and blue is our return. Okay, so this vehicle we're carrying out a diesel injection clean. So we need to add the diesel injection cleaner to the tank. So our fuel system and turbo tank will empty the contents of this can into the machine. And then we're ready to set the machine up for its time and its pressure. Okay, so selecting the fuel system, we now have two settings. We can set the time, so fast is 30 minutes and heavy is 60 minutes, or we can select a time anywhere from 2 minutes up to 90 minutes. For this vehicle, we'll set it as heavy. Pressing the black dial in will now allow us to set the pressure. Generally, a diesel engine will run at around 2 to 2.5 bar, and a petrol engine will run at around about 4 bar. This vehicle in particular will need around about 3 bar for it to start. So we'll set the pressure at 3 bar and press the start button. Pressing the start button now is circulating the treatment through the fuel system and returning back to our machine. Now it is always worth removing the lid of the tank to check that we've got return coming back into the machine, but also we need to check where we've made a connection and ensure that we've got no leaks. So once we've confirmed that we've got no leaks from our feed and return where we've connected, the machine is running, just ensure that the pipe work can't fall down into the engine bay anywhere, and then we're ready to start the vehicle up. Once the vehicle's started, just check your return loop that you've made, just to make sure that there's no leaks from that pipe work anywhere. So now the vehicle is running solely from the machine, carrying out a clean to the injection system. We will now leave this vehicle for its allotted time or until we run out of fluid. Generally, a diesel engine on idle will take around about 45 to 50 minutes to use a complete treatment. So at the end of the operation, it will alert us that the operation is complete and the bleeper will sound. This will be if we've run out of fluid or if we've run out of time. By pressing the stop and return button, we can then return to our home screen and we're ready to disconnect the vehicle from the machine and reconnect it up to its natural fuel system. Okay, so once the operation is complete, we can now disconnect the machine. It's always worth just having a little bit of tissue when you open the connections. We do get a little bit of fluid come out of the connections from time to time, so just catch hold of that. Once we've disconnected it, we can then set it back up to its natural fuel system. Once that's done, we can start the vehicle up and then take the vehicle out for a good road test. Okay, so we've reconnected the fuel system, refitted the pipe work. So we would just start the vehicle up now and just make sure that there's no leaks where we've disconnected and reconnected the fuel connections, and obviously refit any brackets or engine covers that we've had to remove during the process. Once we've finished, it's really important that we empty the machine of any fluid that's left. So to do that with the fuel system, we just simply put a blank connector into our feed pipe and put that into your waste container. When we go into fuel system, press and hold the start button for 3 seconds, and this will start the pump and we will empty the machine. Doing this process means that we remove any fluid and we don't leave the machine standing with fluid until the next service. So there are a few configurations of fuel systems. This particular diagram is similar to the Cougar that we've just connected to. So here we have a feed coming into the filter and a feed out of the filter to our high pressure pump, and then from the pump to our fuel rail. Our return system consists of our leak off back from the injectors, from our fuel rail and from our pump. So when we're looking for the connection, here is where we need to find the common return. So our common return is a connection after these 3 returns have come to one point. With this particular system, we can see again we have our feed in and out of the filter to our pump and to our fuel rail, but we also have a return coming back to our fuel filter. So from our returns, we have from our injectors, from our pump, from our fuel rail, and back to the filter. So our connection point for our common return is before the filter at these connections here before returning back to the tank. In this configuration, we can see on our return that we have our return coming from the injectors and from the rail and from our fuel pump, which return to the fuel filter, but also a return from the fuel filter back to our fuel tank. So again, our common point where we're returning back to the tank is here. So this is where we would connect the machine to return back to the power clean machine. And finally, in this configuration, we've got our returns coming back to the filter and then from our filter back to the tank. But our return from our injectors, from our injector rail and from the injectors, actually links to the pipe closer to the fuel tank. There are some Audi and VW models that adopt this system. So connection is actually very close to the fuel filter, which is situated underneath the car. But it's this common return that we need to find. So this is a good opportunity to have a look at the kit that comes along with the Power Clean machine. So this is the kit for our fuel connections, and it also includes the connections for diesel particulate filters. So looking at the fuel connections, we have first our cup connections, 14 and 19 millimeters. These are both male and female. We also have our 7.9 connections. So we have a male short shoulder and a male long shoulder, and then we also have a male extended connection to suit some female connectors. So we also have the female connectors that go along with this. So here is our straight 7.9 millimeter connector and our right angled 7.9 millimeter connector. Then we move on to our 9.5 millimeter connections. So here is our male 9.5 and our female 9.5 millimeter connection. And then we have at the front here our 10 millimeter male and female and our 12 millimeter female and male connectors. Now there's not a lot of difference between our 10 millimeter connector and our 9.5 millimeter connector. So sometimes it is always worth just using a gauge just to check that we get the right size when we fit them to the vehicle. So here we have a selection of straight pipes and T-pieces. So we have an 8 and 10 millimeter T-piece and an 8 and 10 millimeter straight piece. Sometimes we need to use a T-piece when we're making a fuel connection where we've got two returns coming back to the vehicle. We can make a T-piece to make one return going back to the machine. These all connect to the pipes. So in the kit we have two sizes of pipe. We have an 8mm pipe and a 10mm pipe, and these are the connections that fit to the fuel pipes on the machine. You'll note that our DPF connection is a smaller fitting. Also we have two loop pipes, so there is an 8mm and 10mm loop pipe. So when we disconnect the feed and return from the fuel system, we can form a loop in the pipes that we've taken off, and we can use the attachments in the kit. We have our Jubilee clips of two different sizes there to form the connection and use the pipe ends into our pipe connections and securely make a fastening so we don't have any leaks while we're carrying out a treatment. With our DPF connections, we have our pipe. So if we remove the rubber pipe from the metal pressure pipe on the DPF, we can just put the pipe straight onto that connection. Alternatively, if we're going to connect to the rubber pipe, we have a small connection here which attaches straight to the machine to go into the rubber pipe from the DPF pressure sensor. In very rare occasions we may need to connect to through the sensor or through a temperature sensor. So we have a sprayer, so we would attach the sprayer to our pipe. So when we remove the sensor, we can put that into the DPF. We can also clamp it up, so by adding the clamp, this has a magnet to it, so we can magnet it to the DPF and hold it in position while we're spraying the product in. So that's our kit that comes along with the machine for making connections to the DPF and to our fuel system.